Walk into a serious Texas barbecue joint, and there's one thing on the menu that can make almost everything else look small. Not the brisket, not the sausage, not even a full rack of pork ribs. It's one single beef rib. And calling it a rib almost feels unfair. The bone can look as long as your forearm. On top of it sits a massive chunk of smoked beef, wrapped in a dark, peppery bark, with fat and juices running through the meat. Pick one up, and it feels less like lunch and more like something that came from a dinosaur. That's why you'll often hear them called dinosaur ribs. And if you've ever seen one for the first time, you've probably wondered the same thing. Is everything really bigger in Texas? Are Texas cattle somehow producing enormous ribs? Or are barbecue restaurants using a completely different part of the cow? The answer is more interesting than simply saying, cows are big, because the giant beef rib you see at famous Texas barbecue restaurants is the result of several things coming together. The anatomy of the cow, the way American butchers divide the animal, Texas cattle culture, and a cooking method that can transform one of the toughest parts of the animal into something incredibly tender. But before we get to the smokers, the cattle ranches, and the history of Texas barbecue, we need to solve the first mystery. What exactly is this enormous rib? Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Not all beef ribs are huge. In fact, if you've ever bought beef back ribs at a grocery store, you may have opened the package and wondered, where's all the meat? The bones are there, but sometimes there isn't much meat sitting on top of them. So how does a Texas barbecue restaurant serve a rib with what looks like a small steak attached to it? Because they're often using a different cut. The giant ribs that have become famous in Texas barbecue are commonly beef plate short ribs. You may also hear them called plate ribs, three-bone beef ribs, or, of course, dinosaur ribs. And that distinction changes everything. These ribs come from the lower portion of the rib area of the cow, close to the brisket. Instead of having a thin layer of meat between the bones, plate ribs can carry a thick slab of beef over the top. We're talking about large bones underneath several inches of rich, heavily marbled meat. That's the visual people associate with Texas beef ribs. 3 huge bones, one thick slab of beef. And after hours in the smoker, those bones often stick dramatically out of the meat. It looks almost prehistoric. But here's the important part. Texas didn't make the rib bigger. Texas barbecue simply chose one of the biggest, meatiest rib cuts on the animal. And once pitmasters figured out what smoke and time could do to this cut, it became almost impossible to ignore. So the real question isn't, why are beef ribs so big? It's, why did Texas barbecue fall in love with this particular rib? And we're going to get there. But if you enjoy discovering why famous foods are made the way they are, not just how they taste, hit subscribe. Because behind foods we think we already know, there is usually a much bigger story. And this rib is a perfect example. Because to understand its size, we need to look at the animal underneath all that barbecue. Start with the obvious. Cattle are large animals. A mature beef animal can weigh well over 1,000 pounds. So naturally, its rib bones are going to be much larger than the ribs of a pig. But animal size alone doesn't explain what makes a Texas-style beef rib so impressive. The real secret is the meat sitting on those bones. Different muscles on an animal perform different jobs. Some muscles do relatively little work and can produce naturally tender cuts. Others spend much more time supporting weight and movement. Those harder working areas tend to contain more connective tissue. Plate short ribs come from an area where you get exactly the combination that barbecue loves. Big bones, thick beef, fat, and plenty of connective tissue. Raw, that doesn't automatically mean tender. Actually, it can mean the opposite. Cook this meat too quickly, and it can be chewy and tough. But give it enough time at a low temperature, and that connective tissue becomes an advantage. We'll come back to that. For now, think about the structure. The rib bones act like a giant frame. Above them is a thick layer of meat. Inside that meat is intramuscular fat, what we usually call marbling, along with connective tissue that needs time to soften. This is why a raw rack of plate ribs already looks impressive before it ever touches a smoker. And when it's cooked, something interesting happens. The meat shrinks. Moisture is lost, fat renders. The meat pulls back from the ends of the bones, so the bones become more exposed. Visually, the rib can look even more dramatic after cooking. Those long, clean sections of exposed bone make the whole thing look enormous. But this raises another question. If cows have giant ribs, why don't all beef ribs look like this? To answer that, we need to think like a butcher. A cow only contains so much meat, and some of that meat is extremely valuable. Consider the upper rib area. This is where you find cuts associated with ribeye, and ribeye is one of the most desirable steaks on the animal. So when the meat is separated during butchering, there is a very good reason not to leave a huge amount of valuable ribeye meat attached to the back ribs. That meat can be sold as steak. The result? Beef back ribs can sometimes look surprisingly bare. They're still large bones because they came from a cow, and there can still be flavorful meat between the bones, but they don't necessarily have that giant cap of meat sitting on top that you see on Texas plate ribs. Plate short ribs are different. The way they're cut allows that thick layer of meat to remain attached to the ribs. That's why two products can both be called beef ribs and look almost nothing alike. One may be a rack of long bones with relatively little meat. The other may look like someone placed a giant roast on top of 3 bones. Same animal, different location, different butchering, completely different barbecue experience. And this is one of the most important things to understand about meat. Butchery changes the way we think an animal looks on the plate. A rib isn't just a rib. Where it came from and how it was cut can change everything. But anatomy and butchery only explain how giant beef ribs are possible. They don't explain why they became so strongly associated with Texas. For that, we need cattle. A lot of cattle. Texas and beef have been connected for generations. Long before barbecue restaurants started posting enormous smoked ribs on social media, cattle were already deeply tied to the state's economy and identity. Texas had land, it had ranches, and it developed a powerful cattle culture. After the Civil War, cattle drives became one of the defining images of the American West. Cowboys moved huge herds from Texas toward railroad towns, where cattle could be shipped to markets farther north and east. The image became legendary. Open land, dust, longhorn cattle, cowboys on horseback, and Texas. Of course, the real history is much more complicated than the movie version. But one thing is clear. Beef became deeply embedded in Texas food culture. And that matters when we talk about barbecue. Because American barbecue isn't one single tradition. Different regions became known for different meats and styles. In parts of the Carolinas, pork became central. Memphis became famous for pork ribs and pulled pork. Kansas City developed a broad barbecue tradition, using many different meats. But Texas became beef country. And eventually, one cut would rise above almost everything else: brisket. Today, smoked brisket is probably the most iconic meat in Texas barbecue. But brisket and beef ribs share an important idea. Neither cut becomes extraordinary because it's naturally easy to cook. They become extraordinary because Texas barbecue learned how to use time. Imagine taking a beautiful, tender steak and cooking it for 8 hours. That would make very little sense. A steak is already tender. It doesn't need all that time. Plate ribs are different. They contain connective tissue that makes the meat tough when cooked quickly. So if you treated a thick beef rib like a steak, you could end up chewing for a very long time. Texas barbecue solves that problem with one of the simplest cooking ideas imaginable: low heat and lots of time. Instead of blasting the meat over a hot flame, the ribs spend hours inside a smoker at a relatively low temperature. 6 hours, 8 hours, sometimes longer. The exact time depends on the size of the ribs, the cooking temperature, and the pitmaster. And during those hours, the meat slowly transforms. Smoke moves across the surface, fat begins to render, moisture gradually leaves the meat. The outside becomes darker, and deep inside, something even more important is happening. Connective tissue is breaking down. That is where food science turns a tough cut into barbecue.
One of the most important substances here is collagen. Collagen is a structural protein found in connective tissue. You can think of it as part of the material that helps hold an animal's muscles together. And cuts that contain a lot of connective tissue can be tough. But collagen has a weakness: time and heat. During long cooking, collagen gradually breaks down and converts into gelatin. And gelatin gives slow-cooked meat that rich, soft, almost sticky texture people love. At the same time, fat begins rendering. Some of that fat melts and changes the texture and mouthfeel of the meat. Meanwhile, the surface is undergoing its own transformation. Seasoning, smoke, rendered fat, heat, and drying work together to create the dark exterior barbecue fans call bark. And on a giant beef rib, bark is especially important. Take a slice through a finished rib and you get a beautiful contrast. Dark, peppery bark on the outside, juicy beef inside, softened connective tissue, rendered fat, smoke aroma, and underneath it all, that giant bone. The meat may even jiggle when the pitmaster moves it. But good beef ribs aren't supposed to become mush. The goal is tenderness while still maintaining the structure of the meat. You should be able to bite through it easily while still feeling like you're eating beef. That balance takes experience. Too little time and the meat stays tough. Too much and the texture can fall apart. Too much heat and the outside can dry out before the inside is ready. That is why something that looks as primitive as meat over smoke can require years to master.
And yet, after all those hours of work, many Texas pitmasters begin with a seasoning mix that sounds almost ridiculously simple: salt and pepper. Look at many traditional Central Texas barbecue recipes, and you'll notice something. The seasoning often isn't complicated. There may be variations, of course. Some cooks add garlic or other spices, but one of the classic Texas approaches is built around two ingredients: salt and coarse black pepper. That's it. Why spend hours smoking an expensive piece of beef and season it so simply? Because the point isn't necessarily to cover the beef with dozens of flavors. The beef is the flavor. Salt helps season the meat. Black pepper creates a bold crust and works beautifully with smoke. Then the smoker adds another layer, and the rendered beef fat adds another. The result is a philosophy that can be summed up very simply: beef, smoke, salt, pepper, time. With a huge plate rib, that simplicity makes sense. There's so much meat inside that the dark, heavily seasoned bark creates contrast with every bite. You get the intense outside first, then the rich beef underneath. Nothing needs to hide the flavor of the meat. And when the raw ingredient is good enough, simplicity can actually make the final product feel more luxurious, which is appropriate, because these ribs aren't cheap.
This can be shocking if you've never ordered one. You walk into a famous barbecue restaurant. You look at the menu, you see the price of a beef rib, and you think, for one rib? But that single rib isn't really comparable to one pork rib. It can be enormous, and several factors push the price up. First, you're starting with a large cut of beef. Good quality beef, especially with strong marbling, isn't cheap. Then there's the bone. Barbecue restaurants often sell meat by weight, and a beef rib includes a large, heavy bone. Then comes cooking loss. Raw meat contains a lot of water. During hours of smoking, moisture leaves the meat and fat renders out, so the final cooked rib weighs less than it did when it went into the smoker. The restaurant has paid for the raw product, but it can't sell all of that original weight as finished meat. Then there is time. A smoker may be running for many hours. That requires fuel, space, labor,
preparation, monitoring, and expertise. A pitmaster can't simply throw the ribs into a smoker and forget about them. Temperature matters, timing matters, the quality of the fire matters. And if something goes wrong with an expensive rack of ribs after hours of cooking, that loss costs real money. Finally, there is demand. Texas beef ribs have become a destination food. People travel to famous barbecue restaurants specifically to order one. And that popularity has been amplified by something Texas pitmasters a century ago could never have predicted: the smartphone.
Think about brisket. Brisket may be the king of Texas barbecue, but from across the room, an uncut brisket looks like a big, dark piece of meat. Now imagine a pitmaster holding up a giant beef rib. The bone sticks out. The meat hangs from it. The bark is almost black. The whole thing looks absurdly large. You understand the image instantly. That is a huge piece of meat. No explanation required. Then the pitmaster slices into it. Juice appears on the cutting board. The inside is tender. The meat moves as the knife passes through. Maybe they lift it by the bone. Maybe they squeeze it. Maybe they pull the bone cleanly away. That's perfect food content. YouTube loves it. Instagram loves it. TikTok loves it. And viewers who have never been anywhere near Texas suddenly know what a dinosaur rib is. This helped turn the beef rib into more than a barbecue item. It became a spectacle, a food you want to photograph before you eat it, a food you hold up next to your head just to show how large it is, a food that practically advertises itself. And in a state famous for the phrase, "everything is bigger in Texas," could there possibly be a better barbecue mascot? Still, there's one problem. If beef ribs are this impressive, why isn't the beef rib the undisputed king of Texas barbecue? Why does brisket still get the crown?
Ask barbecue fans to name the meat that defines Texas, and brisket will probably win. There's a reason for that. Brisket is deeply connected to the identity of Texas barbecue. It tests a pitmaster's ability to control fire, temperature, timing, fat, tenderness, and moisture over a long cook. When a great barbecue restaurant serves perfect brisket consistently, that says something about the skill of the people running the pit. Beef ribs share many of those qualities. They're large, they're fatty, they're rich, they require slow cooking, and when they're done well, they're incredible. But they play a slightly different role. Brisket is the institution. The beef rib is the spectacle. Brisket is what barbecue obsessives may judge a restaurant by. The giant beef rib is what makes someone stop scrolling. And there's another difference. A beef rib is incredibly rich. For many people, one is more than enough. It's not necessarily the kind of thing you casually eat every day. It feels like an event. Something you order when you've traveled to Texas and want the full experience. Something you put on the table and everyone immediately reaches for their phone. And maybe that's exactly why it works so well. Texas barbecue already had its king. The beef rib didn't need to replace brisket, it just needed to become unforgettable.
Now we can finally answer the question. Texas beef ribs aren't enormous because cattle in Texas somehow grow magical giant ribs, and they aren't a special oversized species of barbecue meat. What you're usually looking at is a carefully selected cut, the beef plate short rib. It comes from a large animal. It contains big bones. And most importantly, the way it's butchered leaves a thick layer of meat attached to those bones. But anatomy only created the possibility. Texas barbecue created the experience. A state with a deep cattle culture embraced beef. Butchers and pitmasters worked with large, tough cuts, and instead of trying to cook them quickly, they used smoke, low heat, and time. Collagen softened, fat rendered, bark formed, the meat pulled back from the bone. And something that could have been tough and difficult to cook became one of the most dramatic pieces of barbecue in America. Then social media arrived and made the dinosaur rib famous far beyond Texas.
Today, someone thousands of miles away can watch a pitmaster lift a 3-bone rack from a smoker and immediately think, I need to try that. And that's what makes this food so interesting. Its size gets your attention. The smoke makes you hungry. But the real story is what humans figured out how to do with it. Texas didn't make the cow's ribs bigger. It simply figured out how to turn one of the animal's biggest, toughest cuts into something people will travel across the world to eat. So yes, they may look like dinosaur ribs, but they didn't come from a dinosaur. They came from something much more Texan. A big piece of beef, a simple seasoning, a smoky fire, and a pitmaster patient enough to wait.